State Government Policy and Finance Elections Committee. And just to mention, we are very disappointed, though, that we've worked very hard on scheduling this meeting and checking with the Secretary of State's office ahead of time. And yet about 30 minutes ago, we're informed that the Secretary of State would not come. And we know there is staff here, certainly. Secretary of State in this real key time in our election, a presidential election year, that we should have been able to have the Secretary of State here and address the people of Minnesota with the issues and concerns that are really important. So that's really quite disappointing to have that situation. The Secretary of State is the chief election official, so the one responsible and accountable for this. Nevertheless, because there was short notice and we do have county people who have made time today, Mr. Triplett and Ms. Jones, we appreciate you being here. And so we will take that portion of the committee hearing and we'll reschedule the rest of it for another time. So we appreciate that our county officials are, just so we all understand though, I think it's really important, and we see a lot of some confusion out there about mail balloting and absentee balloting and what those things are. We have an unprecedented use of absentee balloting. There are all kinds of things going on all across the country right now that are affecting elections. And it is really a unique time for us to just kind of focus on the process. You know, people get a little bit confused and concerned. And just to clarify, absentee balloting is when a ballot is requested and then mailed out. Mail balloting is when ballots themselves are sent out, usually to something like a voter registration list, though other lists have been known to be used. So that is a big distinction. One is not requested, but sent out. And then you have absentee ballots, which are requested, and then they are sent out. But an absentee ballot doesn't have to be cast through the mail. It can be cast in person at a county, sometimes a city office. It can be cast through the mail. And I think that's important, that it doesn't also have to go through the mail. It can be brought to a county office and deposited there as well, though there is a limit of 3. So I just always wanted, that's the most frequent question that I hear. Couldn't miss this opportunity to just clarify that as well. Senator Lane, do you have a question at this time?
Yes, I just want to clarify that in Minnesota, we do both. We have absentee ballots and we have mail ballots that are sent out to certain townships and certain small cities. They receive them by mail and they send them out by mail.
You are correct. When we're talking about statewide right now, and you are correct that there are those exceptions to that process. And by the way, there are many complaints about that come to me as well. Decision is made by the township board, and a lot of people are very not happy that they don't have the option to do that, but they can do that through absentee voting as well. Nevertheless, let's go on to our agenda that we have right now. That is what I want to have here is that Ms. Helms and also Mr. Triplett, and let's start with Ms. Helms, and that what I'd like you to do is to walk us through the process of an application coming in, what happens from there, all right? If you could just start with that, Ms. Helms. I'm sorry, whenever we have these Zoom meetings, I call on somebody and I look for them and their video has moved to a different spot on the screen. I know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here.
There you are. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for speaking up.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Senators, Madam Chair, would you like me to go through the process for an application coming in through the mail or in person, or both?
Well, explain both. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Senators,
Ms. Helms,
yes.
Ms. Helms, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but this is specific not to the whole state of Minnesota, but what you do in Hennepin County, all right?
I understand, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Senators, thank you. My name is Jenny Gelms. I'm the elections manager for Hennepin County, and I will speak to our procedures in Hennepin County for absentee balloting, whether that's through the mail or in person. Either process begins with an absentee ballot request, as Senator Kiffmeyer said. So the first step for a voter is to fill out an absentee ballot request. There are a number of ways for that to occur. The voter can request a ballot using the Secretary of State's online portal. They can request a ballot using a paper absentee ballot application that they can mail to us or that they can turn into our office. In Hennepin County, we have both the county-wide Hennepin County Elections Office that serves any voter. And there are also in Hennepin County city staff, city locations. Pretty much every city has an in-person absentee voting location in Hennepin County. It's usually in City Hall. Sometimes it's in a different city managed location, and the city clerks manage those city locations. Usually it's typically just one location per city. Minneapolis has several locations because they are so large that they're adding. So the first step is for the voter to complete an absentee ballot application. And then when the application is received, either electronically or physically, the election staff takes that application and enters it into the statewide voter registration system, which is managed by the Secretary of State's office. This is the system that includes all of the voter registration data for all of the voters in Minnesota, including, of course, voters in Hennepin County. So the first thing that the staff member does after making sure that the application is filled out correctly is enter it into that system and look the voter up to see if the voter is registered to vote at the address where they have requested their absentee ballot, and makes the determination there. If the voter is registered to vote at that address, then they are given registered voter materials. If they are not currently registered to vote at that address, they are issued non-registered materials. The main difference between those two sets of materials is that the voter who is not currently registered at the address from which they are requesting their ballot has to complete an election day registration form, just like a voter who shows up to vote in person on election day does if they are not currently registered at that address. So the voter is issued materials. Now, if we are talking about mail voting, if the voter has requested the ballot to be mailed to them, they can request that ballot to be sent to their home where they live. They can request that ballot to be sent to a different location, say they're a snowbird and they're in Florida or somewhere else, we can mail the ballot to them there. But they do include that home address, and that is the check to make sure that they are registered in the county. So they're sent the materials through the mail for the person who is applying to vote absentee in person. They are given the materials right there by the elections staffer, either the county or the city staffer. The materials include the correct precinct ballot according to where that person is currently registered or where they are registering at the time. It includes a secrecy envelope that the ballot is to be folded up and put into by the voter after they've completed the ballot. That secrecy envelope then goes into a signature envelope, and the outside of that signature envelope includes a voter certification that the voter must complete. Now, for a voter who is registered, it includes an oath, and it includes that they have to put their identifying number, their ID number on there. And this will come into play later when that envelope is returned, because there is a check made to make sure that the ID number that is provided by the voter on the envelope matches the ID number that they provided on the application. And they sign it. In the case of a voter who is registering at the time that they are voting, registering at a new address, they also have to have a witness complete the section of the envelope related to the identification that they are providing to prove that they live where they say they do and that they are who they say they are. New this year, typically in an election, the witness is required to sign the certification envelope for both the registered voter and the non-registered voter. But owing to a court order for this election, voters who are pre-registered to vote are not required to have a witness sign that certification envelope. But those voters who are registering to vote do have to have that witness signature. So the voter fills out the ballot, puts it in that secrecy envelope, puts the secrecy envelope inside the certification envelope, fills out the information, and then in the case of a voter who's voting through the mail, puts that signature envelope into the return envelope to send that back through the mail to our office. We do pay for postage on those return envelopes, so the voter's not required to provide postage. For the voter who is voting in person, they put the secrecy envelope with their ballot into the certification envelope, and that is handed sealed and handed to the election staffer who is assisting them to vote. The election staffer checks over the certification envelope, makes sure it meets all the requirements and it's filled out properly, and marks that ballot then as accepted in the statewide voter registration system. For the ballots that come through the mail to us, again, staffers are receiving those ballots in the mail. They go through the mail on a daily basis. They check through each envelope to make sure it's filled out completely and appropriately, and that ID number matches. And if it does, it's accepted and put into secure storage, again, with all of the accepted ballots to be opened and counted at a later date. For those ballots that come to us through the mail that are not filled out properly, that there's something wrong, say the ID number doesn't match. If the ID number doesn't match, there is a second step to go to where we can check to see if the voter's signature on the envelope matches the voter's signature on the absentee ballot application. If it matches, again, this is all according to statute, then we are to accept the ballot. If it does not, or if we do not have a signature to compare to, as in the case of voters who apply for their absentee ballot online, we often do not have a wet signature to actually compare with, then that ballot may be rejected, and the voter is notified that their ballot has been rejected and given a chance to, they're sent a new ballot, and they're given a chance to fill out the new ballot and complete the documentation appropriately and send it back to us. So once the ballot has been accepted, whether it's through the mail or in person, it is marked as such in the statewide voter registration system, and it is kept, as I said, securely with other ballots in a secure location where only election staff have access until we are ready and allowed to start opening and processing those absentee ballots. Madam Chair, would you like me to continue just to describe the opening and counting process, or would you like me to leave it there?
Oh, you go ahead, Ms. Gelms.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and Senators. So once we reach the day where it is time to open and start processing those absentee ballots, and in prior elections, that would be the week before the election, but we're into a court order for this election. We have 2 weeks prior to Election Day to start doing that, which we appreciate because of the large volume of ballots that we are going to have to process and get ready for Election Day. Our absentee ballot board retrieves the ballots from the secured location and begins the process of opening the series of envelopes, which I just described, in order to count the ballots. So the function of the secrecy envelope that the voter puts their ballot into is that when our absentee ballot board opens the signature envelope that has the voter information in it, that envelope is separated from the secrecy envelope so that nobody sees how the ballot was actually marked for that particular voter, can't connect the ballot with the votes to that voter's name. So those pieces are separated, and we are, of course, double counting every step of the way to make sure that we have the appropriate number that we expect, the number of ballots, the number of envelopes, and that we're not missing an envelope, ballot in an envelope somewhere. Once all of the signature envelopes are opened, then we begin the process, and this is done by precinct. We begin the process of opening the secrecy envelopes. And I should also mention that, of course, our absentee ballot board members who do this work do it in pairs, so nobody is ever alone with a set of ballots. In Hennepin County, we typically in the past have done this in one very large room with a bunch of people crammed together in that room. Obviously, in the pandemic, we've had to spread out somewhat, so we have a number of different rooms that, again, are our Hennepin County facilities where we're doing this work so that we can have enough distance between different teams of people to keep people safe. So they begin opening the secrecy envelopes, they take the ballots out, and then they are, again, counting to make sure we have the number of ballots that we expect. They are backbending the ballots to make them as flat as possible. and they're checking, they're doing a preliminary check to make sure that there aren't any tears or something that would make the ballot be potentially unreadable by the machines. They add the election judge initials to the top of the ballots, and then the ballots are collated and piled up and ready to be run through the ballot counters. Now in Hennepin County, we have several high-speed ballot counting machines that can read, I believe it's up to 300 ballots per minute. So the ballots are read by precinct, they're put into the machine reads them and processes them. We do not receive results at that time. The machine is storing the information from those ballots in its internal memory, and then the ballots are packaged back up securely into a transfer case, they're sealed, and they're returned back to secure storage and retained there for, if we need to access them later for a recount or for the post-election audit. So that is the process for running the ballots through the machines. And then on election night, as I'm sure you're all aware, we, again, according to state statute, have to combine the results from our absentee ballots in a precinct with the results from the in-person election day ballots before we are allowed to report results for any particular precinct. So on election night, that is when we are able to pull the results off of those high-speed ballot counters for the absentee ballots, and then they are put into our election reporting system along with the results from the election day ballots. Those two numbers are combined, and that is what is reported on the Secretary of State's website for election results on election night, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chelms. I think it's really helpful to be able to just go through that whole process. I do say, though, there are a couple things I want to ask a further question about. One of them is when a voter is not registered and you send out a voter registration application and then it comes back to you, is the same verification steps done for that voter registration application as you would any other way, method, or receiving of that voter registration?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Chelms.
Yes, I appreciate that question. Yes, the answer is yes. When we receive a voter, we are processing an absentee ballot application for a voter who is registering to vote. They have to return that voter registration application, just like a voter in the polling place. It has to be completed the same way. They have to provide the same kind of identification that's available to those voters who register on election day in the polling place. And that application is treated exactly the same as those election day registrations that we receive in the polling place. That process is all managed through the statewide voter registration system. The same checks on the identity, the social security number if provided, or the driver's license number if that is provided, are performed. And then there are additional checks after election day, including a non-forwardable postcard is sent to the voter's address where they are registered to check to make sure that they live where they say they do. It's the same process as that used for voters who vote and register on election day.
Thank you, Ms. Chelms. What if they say, well, I don't have an ID or driver's license or state ID, don't have a social security number? In those cases, especially when it is a mailed in type situation, how do you handle that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is a box to check on the application to register that certifies that they do not have either a driver's license or a social security number to provide. And there is a process for that, but I have to admit to you that it is so rare that we see that I'm not recalling at the moment what is done with those registrations. But it is that process. It would be the same for a voter who votes absentee through the mail as it is for a voter who registers at any other time of the year in terms of verifying that voter's identity. That would remain the same regardless of whether they're voting absentee or they're registering at some other time of year.
Thank you, Ms. Chelms. I appreciate that. And I don't know if you mentioned it, but some folks have noticed that there is a barcode and they get concerned sometimes about the privacy of their vote. Could you explain the purpose of the barcode and why it matters to the election system processing? Ms. Gelms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that question. In Hennepin County, there are a number of different kinds of barcodes that somebody might see on their voter registration or their absentee ballot materials. For some voters in Hennepin County, there is a barcode on the envelope that contains the information of what precinct ballot is contained in that envelope. And that is so that our vendor who helped us do the initial mail out, the big batch of ballots that we had at the very beginning of the absentee voting process, they use that barcode just to help their machines pick the right ballot for the voter. So that's the only information that's contained in that barcode. It's to make sure that the right ballot gets to the right voter. The other barcode that voters, and this isn't just for the voters who were in that batch, but any voter will see, is a barcode on some of the labels that are applied to their signature envelope. And that barcode is generated out of the statewide voter registration system, along with the label that the statewide voter registration system produces for that voter. And the information contained in that barcode is a link back to that voter's record in the statewide voter registration system. And the purpose of that is that when we receive that envelope back, again, whether that's being done in person at a city or county office, or when we receive that ballot back through the mail, when we are going through and entering all of those envelopes into the statewide voter registration system, our staff have a barcode reader that they can quickly check the barcode on that envelope, and it brings up that voter's record in the statewide voter registration system, so they can mark, okay, this voter has returned their ballot, and now it will be going through the accepting or rejecting process. So the information contained in that barcode is just who the voter is in the statewide voter registration system. And again, I would point to, sometimes we hear concerns about voter privacy around this. Does the barcode contain information about how I voted? The answer is no. And again, that's why we're separating that signature envelope that has the voter's information on it from the secrecy envelope that contains the voter's ballot. So there's never any connection made between how you actually voted and who you are in the system. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gelms. I think that's helpful to have it. I think the next question I have for you, though, has to do with ballot boards. And in particular, state law requires that ballot boards have election judges of different political parties. So could you address how you handle making sure that you have ballot boards? And this is really important because the accepting and the rejecting is a very sensitive point. And we just want to be sure that, by the way, I've always thought I worked as an election judge in the polling place for 11 years before entering any other kind of a role in the political system. And it's the one place where I found we, as political parties who might be having pros and cons and other kinds of discussions going on. But in the polling place on election day, we were all united around making sure, and that's where political parties and their give and take, act on the behest of all of us in watching over that election process. So each of them have a vested interest in being sure, and you end up actually with a very neutral system going on because of that. And so when ballot boards are there, we want to be sure that we have that same advantage on behalf of everybody else. So Ms. Gelms, can you tell me how you do party balance, where you get the names from, how you contact them, how you schedule them? Could you just give us a little more specifics about the ballot boards?
Yes, Madam Chair. In Hennepin County, you're absolutely correct. The state statute does provide for election judges who serve with a party affiliation to be members of ballot boards. My understanding of the law also provides for deputy county auditors to serve on absentee ballot boards. And that is what we do in Hennepin County. The way that we staff our absentee ballot board, because it is an enormous number of people, particularly this year, we hire people specifically for this process. So we go through our regular Hennepin County hiring system. We have a posting that goes up It's open competitive, anybody can apply, and then we go through our regular hiring process to hire people to serve on this board. And when they are hired for that purpose, they are then made deputy county auditors, and they serve in a nonpartisan capacity on our absentee ballot board. I know that so cities in Hennepin County also have their own absentee ballot boards. Some of them do use election judges as in that process. Some of them also, I think many of them also use deputy auditors, essentially deputy city clerks, and the city clerks themselves can serve on the absentee ballot board as well.
Thank you, Ms. Gelms. I am puzzled by that, though, because I think it clearly is in statute. Matter of fact, it says must have in regards to election judges, and then you may use those staff. And I appreciate some of that, but it seems to me when the legislature has worked very hard to try and convey the same value that happens in a polling place with election judges, where they would be overseeing that's not what I'm sounding like to you. You actually have people applying for these jobs, and they're applying for these jobs just to do absentee ballot board work. Why not then just have election judges?
Madam Chair, it's really a personnel management issue. As I'm sure you're aware, having served in polling places and having been Secretary of State, in many years, it's very difficult. Pandemic aside, even in regular election years, it's often very difficult for cities to even find enough people to serve in the polling places. There is a process whereby, as I know you are aware of, the political parties do provide lists of names of people who have said that they're willing to serve. Cities go through those lists, and they often exhaust them before they get the required number of people that they need in order to serve in the polling place. So, I would also add that when people are interested in serving as an election judge, that kind of work, it being a single training plus a single day of work in the polling place, that's a very different kind of commitment than committing to serving on the Hennepin County absentee ballot board, which meets for 46 days every day, every weekday and many weekends leading up to the election. So it's simply the case that in order to get the amount of labor that we need in order to actually process all these ballots, yes, we do have to treat it like we're hiring for a regular job. And we train these people in the same way that election judges are trained. They go through the same process in committing to serving in a nonpartisan fashion. And we have, as I said, checks and balances to make sure that there are no individual workers who are alone with ballots at any time. They're always being overseen by election staff as well. And just to give you a sense, for this year, we will have literally hundreds. We need hundreds of workers in order to process the absentee ballots just at the Hennepin County location alone. So it is an issue in terms of being able to provide the amount of labor that we need in order to do all of that work. And Madam Chair, I appreciate your point about the law in allowing us to use election judges for that purpose. My understanding around using deputy county auditors on our absentee ballot board, I would say, is in line with the guidance that we have received and that every county receives from the Secretary of State's office on this point, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gelms. We have some folks who have questions, and I do have you. Senator Carlson, just a moment. I will call on you. Ms. Gelms, I appreciate your comments in regards to that. We have several questions regarding that. I'm going to go to Senator Coran first, and then Senator Carlson. Then I have Senator Jasinski and Senator Howe. So Senator Coran, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And
can you speak up, Senator Coran?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this better?
Yes, much better.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Gelm, help me understand, kind of the chain of control or the chain of command of the ballot process. You described it at the high level. This year, you described the process as one far greater volume than we normally have from a mailed-in ballot perspective, but you didn't cover the 7 days post-election in which we intend to count ballots. And so what's the chain of command, or what comfort do we have that the chain of command in the handling of the ballots in the mailroom, tabulators, what does that process look like from a tabulator perspective? And then how do we apply that equal representation from as Senator Kiffmeyer and you guys just had a conversation of, how do we ensure that there's fair, neutral oversight for the ballot board process? Because I see a huge challenge of unmarked ballots, and how do we make sure that the mailroom, the chain of command, because we're going to be accepting them, I guess, for 7 days after that, the election procedure or process, or the postal service isn't a procedure that they are required to postmark ballots. How do we ensure that those are actually going to be ballots that have been submitted in the election process prior to the November 3rd date, or on November 3rd? Please help describe that for us, would you please? Thank you.
Ms. Gelms.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator. The question regarding I think you're interested in the chain of custody around ballots after Election Day, the ballots that we will be continuing to add to the process if they're postmarked in time and received in time. The chain of custody for those ballots is exactly the same as the chain of custody that we receive through the mail prior to Election Day. And that is, so the ballot comes to our Hennepin County mailroom, and it remains intact in its envelopes. The mailroom delivers that mail to our election staff and our absentee ballot board. Our absentee ballot board, as part of the process of accepting those ballots, is checking those envelopes to make sure that they are sealed. And once they've accepted the envelopes and those ballots are marked in the statewide voter registration system, all those ballots are then packed into a transfer case and sealed. The transfer case is by absentee ballot board and election staff. That transfer case is moved from the room where the accepting and rejecting is done into our secure ballot storage room, which again is it is locked. It is key card access to key election personnel who have access to that. We keep a log of everybody who enters that room, and they are stored in that secure room until it is time to open those envelopes and prepare those ballots for being run through the counter. When that happens again, it's members of election staff who have access to that room who go in there, fill out the log that they've been in there, retrieve the sealed transfer cases for the particular precincts that are going to be processed, bring that to the room where the absentee ballot board is doing that process. As I said, the absentee ballot board members work in teams of 2. They are overseen by election staff. I would again note that every absentee ballot board member, just like election judges, are trained in the procedures. They're trained in being nonpartisan. They're trained, they take an oath to uphold the process in a nonpartisan fashion. And they process the envelopes in the way that I had previously described this afternoon. And when the ballots have gone through the whole process, again, in the presence of the absentee ballot board and the election staff, they are packed back up into transfer cases, sealed, taken by election staff back into the secure storage room, retained there until they are needed again for a recount or an audit. Once we get past the recount and audit period, those sealed transfer cases are retained along with the other election materials for 22 months according to state statute before they are destroyed. Does that answer your question, Senator?
Thank you, Ms. Gelms. Senator Grant, we do have other questioners. So Senator Grant, if we can maybe.
Madam Chair, quick. How does one, I think the previous conversation about, we're really concerned about the neutral nature of the ballot boards. And you just described that you can train somebody to be nonpartisan. How does one train someone to be nonpartisan?
Ms. Gelms.
Madam Chair, Senator, the training to be nonpartisan is exactly as you would expect. We explain to the people that we hire that the thing that they are being hired to do is to safeguard the process, and we train them on the specific steps on how to do that. I would say that we can train people that we hire through our regular Hennepin County hiring process to be nonpartisan exactly the same way that we train election judges to be nonpartisan. As I said, they all take an oath to serve the process, and they are all always under the observation of election staff who I would say also serve in a nonpartisan fashion. I serve in a nonpartisan fashion. Every member of my staff serves as in nonpartisan fashion. None of us are election judges. We are all professional election staff, and we all take this very seriously, as do the people. We instill that value in our training in everybody that we hire to serve on our absentee ballot board. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gelms. I appreciate that. But Ms. Gelms, I will say to you, there is a big difference between training political party folks and training them on how to process and how to do this. And then they do this sort of work, than having folks from within and not going through that. But the big thing is 203B.121 subdivision 1 clearly states that you must have election judges. I'll read here. The board must consist of a sufficient number of election judges trained in the handling of absentee ballots and appointed as provided in sections 204B19.22. And that's really important to recognize that. That is a must. It's not an option, it's a must. And then it goes on and said the board may include deputy auditors, but may include implies that there are election judges to begin with who are from the political party source. And so I'm just going to remind you of that, and that there is a big distinction between training them and how to handle. I think it's difficult to say that they're trained in neutrality. It's like, I think I would rather have that. Senator Carlson, I'll call on you next.
Well, Madam Chair,
Next,
it's gone
Senator
far
Carlson.
enough. Madam Chair, this is currently under litigation, and it is not appropriate for this committee to add information or to dispute anything that is under litigation. So what we need to do is stop this conversation and let that litigation proceed. No one here is representing the plaintiff or the defendant in court, and we should not be discussing it.
Senator Carlson, we are having an administrative discussion on process and asking questions that are legitimately before this committee. And this is very important that this kind of information be made available to the general public, of interest to them, and also to this committee. There is nothing that we are asking here that has any bearing in regards to asking for that information legitimately that can be asked.
Madam Chair, you read off the law. You have read off points in the law. This is what is in litigation right now.
Thank you, Senator Carlson, for your comments. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm fairly comfortable with the absentee balloting. My concern is the mail-in, but I do have a question about the absentee balloting. Considering what's going on this year, how many ballots do you anticipate coming in the last day versus a normal year or a different year? So if it's 20% or 50%, what number? And then when you process those for, I guess we have up to 7 days, are you processing them every day, or are you waiting till the end of the 7 days to process those absentee ballots?
Ms. Gelms, do you want to respond to that? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, we will be taking every day that is in Hennepin County. I can't speak for other counties. We do use every single day that is available to us to process ballots, and that is because we have such a high volume. We want to make sure we have all of those ballots processed timely by election day. As for the percentage of ballots that we expect to be returned on the last day, I have to tell you, I don't have a really, because there's really no historical data for us on this point, aside from the August primary that we ran, which is not necessarily comparable for a number of reasons. I can't say with any certainty what percentage we expect to receive on the last day, but it is our intention to have as many ballots as possible processed and ready to add to our election night unofficial results totals on election night. We were able to do that largely in the primary, and part of the reason that we've needed to have so many people added to our absentee ballot board this year is to make sure we have the capacity to process all of those ballots when we get them in a timely fashion, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gelms. All right, Senator Jasinski, thank you very much. I think we have Senator Howe, and then we'll go to Senator Howe, if you would like to go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Gomes, I guess, you know, when I've witnessed the election process and the ballot process, it correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that when you put your ballot into the counter, if it's got an issue, it gets rejected, and I get a chance to correct that. I don't see that that's a possibility with a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot, because those envelopes get separated for security purposes, so you don't know whose ballot it is. So if that ballot gets rejected, what happens to those spoiled ballots? And what's the process? Because those people, I guess, their votes will not count because it's a spoiled ballot. So what happens to those spoiled ballots during that process?
Ms. Gelms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, before I answer that question, I would like to clear up some verbiage. So when we in elections administration talk about spoiled ballots, that means something different, I think, to somebody outside of elections administration than it does to us. To us, a spoiled ballot is actually a ballot that a voter, say in the polling place, has gone to, has made a mistake in the voting booth and comes back to the election judge and asks for a replacement ballot. That initial ballot that the voter made the mistake on, they say, I don't want this, I want a fresh, clean slate. That ballot is called a spoiled ballot. So when we talk about spoiled ballot, and the reason I'm at pains to mention this is because whenever the statistic around spoiled ballot comes up, I think people get a little alarmed when they see, oh, we had X number of spoiled ballots at this particular precinct. When we have spoiled ballots in a precinct, those are actually each represent a voter who got another chance to fill out a ballot. So just some point of clarity around the term of art there. But you're absolutely right, Senator. For a voter who is voting in person, and I would mention that this is true in the polling place, it's also true during the last week before the election. We have the option to make precinct ballot counters available to in-person absentee voters, which we do that in Hennepin County, so that voters who come and request an absentee ballot in person, voted in person, are able to put that ballot directly into a ballot counter. So those folks, along with the folks on election day, do have the benefit of the precinct ballot counter flagging any issue if they filled in 2 ovals in the same race, for example. That is flagged by the precinct counter at the time that the voter votes, and the voter has the option to return the ballot and spoil it and get a new one. For voters who vote through the mail, you're absolutely right, because we have that separation of identity from the ballot. Once the mail ballots are run through the precinct counter, we do not know whose ballot is whose. And so there is not an option for a voter who has made a mistake like that on those ballots to correct that mistake. But I would say that an important thing to know is that if somebody makes a mistake in a particular race, say, again, they filled in more than one oval for a particular race, what happens is the ballot counter, because it cannot determine which person in that particular race the voter intended to vote for, it doesn't count the vote in that race. But that does not ruin the rest of the ballot. What happens is that the ballot counter counts as many votes as possible from that person's ballot, so that it doesn't ruin the whole ballot. It just it does not make a selection for the particular race where the voter made the mistake. I think that's important to know. The other thing that I would mention is when we have a close race and there is a recount is requested, when a recount is done, all those ballots are counted by humans. So, election judges look at those ballots when they're doing the recount process. And because we have voter intent statute in Minnesota that has rules around what we can make the determination of as election judges and elections administrators when we're physically looking at a ballot. If a voter, say, fills in 2 ovals in a particular race and crosses one out, and we can see by looking at that ballot that the voter intended to vote for the oval that's not crossed out. In a recount situation, that is how we count that ballot. Obviously, a ballot counter is not smart enough to be able to do that. But I just wanted to add that too. For races that are close, we have that second check when we're doing a recount. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So
Thank you, Ms. Gelms. And just to mention that when there is a recount, we have political parties being directly involved and looking at every single ballot together present in the room, which leads me to the question of in a polling place and also after the polls close. So during the day, poll challengers from political parties can be present to observe the process. And in after the polls are closed, when there is the counting part going on, folks are able to observe, long as they don't interfere with and that they are observing, but not being a party to the process, but observing. So when it comes to absentee ballot boards, Ms. Gelms, you have actual accepting, rejecting, that very important work going on. I want to mention that the question we have is, after the polls close on election night, and there is that right in law for anybody to come and observe, again, without interfering, but to observe. Will that be the case also when you are going through absentee ballots that come in after Election Day?
Yes, Madam
Gelms.
Chair, we are working on our procedure to make sure that anybody who wishes to observe the counting process can do so at Hennepin County. As I'm sure you can imagine, that is a little bit tricky, again, with the pandemic in particular this year. So we're trying to figure out the best way to make that process publicly viewable, but also maintain the safety of our staffers and any people who wish to observe. So I don't have the details for you on that yet. We're still figuring that out right now, but we will have something in place by the time we start counting those ballots. Yes, Madam Chair.
So Ms. Gelms, will you be using election judges in regards to that work after the polls close on Election Day? And in that following period of time, will you be using election judges from the political party lists?
Madam Chair, we will be
Gelms.
using the same members of our absentee ballot board will be performing the work prior to Election Day and after Election Day. It is the same work regardless of whether it occurs prior to Election Day or after Election Day, and it's members of our absentee ballot board who will be doing that.
All right, Ms. Gelms, I will go on to
Madam Chair, can I follow up with my question?
briefly, Senator Howe, I do have another
Thank you, Madam Chair.
list.
When I'm a little confused because we said that when we feed that ballot into the ballot counter and it's not right, and we get a chance to fix it when we're in person. And then when it's absentee ballot or mail-in ballot, it goes through. And you say it counts those votes that if somebody blackened in 2 ovals, it counts the rest of them, just doesn't count that race. Are you saying when I fed it in person, it counts them too, and then I get the check, fix it, and it feeds in and corrects it? And so if that's not the case, what is the difference between that reader that I put it in one spot and you put it in another spot? How come they operate differently? Can you clear that up for me? I'm confused.
Ms. Gelms, that's a frequent, I know, again, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Howe. In point of fact, actually, you could have the option as a voter in the polling place to direct the election judge who is operating the ballot counter to hit the button. If you're just done and you're tired and you don't care that there's a mistake on your ballot, you can instruct that ballot counter to count as much as it can of your ballot and disregard the portion where you made a mistake, just like the high-speed ballot counters do for us when we're doing the absentee ballot. So they, in fact, do operate the same way, but it's just that we have made the behavior, we've programmed the ballot counters in the polling place because the voter is there to give them that option to return the ballot. It does not count the ballot twice. It simply does the first check and sees if there is an error. If there is, then that's the decision point. The error message is displayed and the voter is given the option to return that ballot to themselves and vote a new one, or to have the ballot counter count it as marked. That count as marked is the behavior that the high-speed ballot counters have programmed into them, because we know that the voter isn't going to be standing there to be able to make that correction. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gillum. Senator Howe, does that clarify?
Yes, it does. It'd be interesting to know how many of those spoiled ballots, what percentage of ballots end up being spoiled, or how many of those we have.
It would be interesting, Senator Howe. I think that is something that maybe Ms. Gelms you might do. By the way, for members of this committee and anybody who is interested, you could contact your local county auditor's office. That's what it's called in most counties. In Hennepin County, Ramsey County, they have election administrators, but you can just call the county and wind your way there and ask. Senator Howe, I'd encourage you to do this. Sometimes it's so much easier when you can be there and see it and ask them to walk you through that process, because it is important, but that's another opportunity for you to do that. And I think it'd be very, very good for you to do so. Thank you, Ms. Gelms. Senator Newman is next on my list. Senator Newman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Gelms, I'm not sure I understood earlier. We were talking about mail ballots and absentee ballots. Did you say that witnesses were or were not required for mailed ballots and absentee ballots?
Ms. Gelms.
Madam Chair, Senator, for this election, a witness is required on the signature envelope for a voter who votes, an absentee voter who votes through the mail, if they are registering at the same time that they are voting, if they're filling out a new registration application at the same time that they're voting their absentee ballot. Again, under a court order for this election, a witness is not required on the signature envelope for a voter who is pre-registered to vote. And just a note on the terminology, again, in Hennepin County, we have absentee voting. It's absentee voting whether it's voting through the mail or voting in person. There is mail voting, as Madam Chair Kiffmeyer said earlier, for some greater Minnesota counties. We don't have mail voting in Hennepin County, where a ballot is automatically mailed to voters. Voters have to request the absentee ballot. So for us, it's mail voting and absentee voting in Hennepin County are all absentee voters, all mail ballots are absentee ballots.
Madam Chair, follow-up
Thank you,
question.
Ms. Gelms. Senator Newman.
In my case, Ms. Gelms, I live in the country and it's mandatory mail-in ballots for me. I am a registered voter. And my wife also is a registered voter and voted absent by absentee. My understanding of having a witness on either mail-in ballots or absentee ballots was simply part of the election process to protect the integrity of the ballot. So when you get a ballot from someone like me, or even an absentee ballot where no witnesses are required, what kind of protections are in place to guarantee that the person who filled out the ballot is the person who in fact either mailed it back or hand delivered it to the auditor?
Ms. Gelms.
And I say that because when I voted, for instance, I just didn't see that there was any protection to indicate that I was in fact the person who handed in the ballot or filled it out, for that matter.
Ms. Gelms.
Madam Chair, Senator, thank you. I'll say if there are specific questions to mail voting where ballots are automatically mailed to voters, that perhaps Secretary of State staff may take those particular questions. Since we don't have that in Hennepin County, I can't speak personally to that. I will say, as I said earlier, the big check on the identity of the voter who returns the ballot, and the check in the system to make sure that that's the same person who requested the ballot, is that the identification number provided on the envelope by the voter who filled out the envelope, that identification number matches the identification number that was provided on the application that requested the absentee ballot. So those two numbers are checked to make sure that they match. If they do not match, and there is a signature available for the voter because the voter filled out a physical absentee ballot application, then the signature is checked to make sure that the signature matches between the application and the signature on the absentee ballot envelope. And that's the check that's done to make sure that the voter who requested the ballot is the voter who filled out the ballot. And I would also, oh, sorry, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I thank you, Ms. Gelms. I think the senator's question was specific to mail, so I didn't want to have you taking the time to go over what we've already covered pretty much. So I do appreciate the distinction being made. So Mr. Maeda, would you be able to talk about how Senator Newman's question, I trust you've been following that along, and could you answer that?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is David Maeda. I'm the Director of Elections for the Secretary of State's office. And Senator Newman, you are correct. There are different processes for absentee ballots as opposed to mail ballot precincts. And Ms. Gelms 100% covered the absentee process perfectly. For mail ballot precincts, the check really is the voter has to sign the oath on the back of the envelope. And then because they're only sent to registered voters, if anything else changes, then they have to vote non-registered absentee materials.
Thank you,
Chair,
Mr.
just one
Maeda.
final-
Senator Newman?
Yeah, just one final comment. I do appreciate, Mr. Maeda, what you've just outlined. But at least in my mind, it does not address the question of whether or not the ballot that you mailed out to a registered voter, in fact, was filled out by that registered voter and returned to the county auditor. And in the system now, without that witness, which is simply one of the steps that was implemented in order to protect the integrity of the process, you've simply eliminated that step. And I really haven't heard anything to indicate to me that the person who filled out the ballot, in fact, is the person who the ballot was mailed to. And I then begin to wonder, well, maybe the person, the registered voter, recently moved or is an elderly person and was moved into some housing in town and is now can vote in person. So what happens when that guy goes and tries to vote in person and is told, well, you've already voted?
That's a different kind of question, Senator Newman. Ms.
It is
Gelms.
indeed a different kind of question, but I think it goes to the voter integrity issue regarding mailed ballots. And I simply do not see the protection in place for mailed ballots.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Your point is well taken. One of the things, again, the polling place has been set up for many, many years for excellent reasons. The privacy of the vote, the accuracy, the help, the assistance of preventing coercion, making sure that it is the voter who is marking the ballot and casting the ballot. Those are things, and anytime you use any other methodology, we often sacrifice several of those things. Ms. Gelms, I have a question for you. Senator Westrom, I'll go to you next. So, Ms. Gelms, in regards to the court, which upheld Minnesota state law, one of the rare things that it actually did, uphold Minnesota election law, and that is the limit on one person returning, carrying 3 ballots. So can you explain how you are going to enforce that when you are putting ballot drop boxes? Oftentimes, maybe you can explain where you place them. How are you going to enforce the 3 limit in regards to that situation, Ms. Gelms?
Thank you, Madam Chair. just for a point of clarity, Hennepin County, our drop-off locations are all staffed. We have received guidance from the Secretary of State's office that unstaffed drop boxes are permitted with the use of particular best practices, but Hennepin County is only operating staffed drop-off locations. So our process for drop-off ballots for this election remains the same as for previous elections, which is that when an individual comes to our staff to drop off their ballot, they are asked if they're returning their own ballot. If they are not, then they are required to show identification, and their name is taken along with their address, as well as the name and address of any voter whose ballot they are returning. That is a manual log that our staff maintain, and that is checked through to make sure that we are only allowing people to return up to 3 ballots for other individuals aside from their own ballot. Again, that's a manual process. That's something that we're checking through manually on a daily basis.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gelms. That's very important to hear. You introduced it by saying there was guidance from the Secretary of State office in regards to how to handle those drop boxes, whether they are staffed or unstaffed. Do you have that document, and could you share that with Mr. Carlson so the rest of our committee would have an opportunity to see that as well?
Madam Chair, I do not have that document in front of me at the moment, and I would defer to the Secretary of State's office to provide whatever guidance they have.
Madam Chair, we'd be happy to provide that to you.
Thank you, Mr. Maeda. You had referenced it, Ms. Gelm, so that's why I thought just maybe that you had it handy there as well. All right. The other thing is, I think that is something, the staffing of ballot drop boxes and unstaffed. Mr. Maeda, since we have you here, what's the difference between staffed and unstaffed drop boxes for absentee ballots?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, obviously a staff will have somebody that is watching to ensure that the voter is only putting their own ballot in the ballot box and is not delivering more than one ballot, obviously. For an unstaffed, the guidance basically that we've given is they have to have information by the drop box indicating that they are only allowed to drop off their own ballot. If they're dropping off someone else's ballot, then they have to go see the staff, county or city staff, and the drop box itself has to be visibly monitored.
When you, thank you, Mr. Maeda. Mr. Maeda, when your last sentence there was something about monitoring. Is that
Right.
like a video or something that is monitoring? And is that required by the Secretary of State office in order to be unstaffed, Mr. Maeda?
Madam Chair, yeah, correct. It either has to be in sight of somebody in the building or it can be video monitored.
Is that video then a public document available to the public? Mr. Maeda?
Madam Chair, I might defer that question. Our staff attorney, B.B. Black, is our data practices officer, and she might have a better opinion on that I can offer.
Well, you know what? We're going to have the Secretary of State office. We're running out of time here. So I think we'll just leave that and we'll arrange for a kind of going over those things a little bit more as we go further here. And I have Mr. Triplett, Senator Westrom, you're next on for a question here. Senator Newman, are you still up for a question, or is just that your hand up? I just want to be sure I have my list accurate.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, no, I'm trying to lower my hand now.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. That really helps. Senator Westrom, you're next to ask a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll ask the question. I'm not sure if it's appropriate for the Hennepin County election official or somebody at the Secretary of State's office, but I've got a question and then a follow-up or two. But we talked about the mail-in ballots and the absentee ballots. There is a difference. I've heard from several constituents that their envelopes have had an R or a D marked on them. And they have asked me the question, and this was the primary, why are those envelopes marked R or D? And I don't know the answer to that question, other than, does it have anything to do with the primaries being specific to you vote Democrat or Republican, or specifically to a party? But whoever can answer that question, that'd be insightful, because I wasn't aware that envelopes were coming out with R's and D's on them.
Yeah, Senator Westrom, that is not a question for the counties. And as I stated when we introduced this meeting, that we are going to focus on the counties. We're running short of time. We are going to reschedule the Secretary of State to come back. And then I think we can follow that train of thought.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
And then I've got a question relating to postmarks, Madam Chair.
Oh, then go ahead with but again, Senator Westrom, we are focusing on how the counties are handling it at this time.
Right. So, Madam Chair, a question that I've had is, how will the postmarks be handled on ballots? I assume it's going to have a date of election or prior postmark. And first, if that's correct, then what if a ballot comes in after the election with no postmark? What is the status of that ballot? And one more follow-up after that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Westrom. And Ms. Jones, could you just tell us how it happens in Hennepin County? And Mr. Triplett, we are going to get to you next. Thank you, Ms. Gelms. How do you handle it in Hennepin County in regards to postmarks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, we follow any guidance issued by the Secretary of State with regard to postmarks. So again, if the ballot is postmarked by Election Day and we receive it within 7 days after Election Day, then that is that is counted. In terms of ballots that do not have a postmark, I don't have the data in front of me right now as to how many or if we saw many ballots without a postmark in the 2 days following the election when we did this in August. So I would defer to the Secretary of State on whatever their guidance is for how we are to treat those ballots that do come in after Election Day that do not have a postmark.
Thank you very much,
Madam
Ms.
Chair.
Gelms and Senator Westrom. We'll have the Secretary of State back and then we'll go more into that. Your other question, Senator Westrom?
So, Madam Chair, just for this moment in time, though, you do not have guidance on how to handle ballots that do not have a postmark. You don't have that guidance from the Secretary.
Ms. Gelms?
Madam Chair, Senator, I believe all of the ballots that we received for the primary did have postmarks on them. So I do not have the guidance in front of me. That does not mean that we haven't received guidance. I just don't have it in front of me at the moment.
Okay. Last question, Madam Chair. So
thank you, Ms. Gelms. Senator Westrom, your last question.
How do you know if a ballot comes in a day 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 with a postmark of the election day? How do you differentiate between any ballots that maybe weren't mailed on election day, but through offices or companies that have a postmark meter? How do you prevent postmark meters from being put on an envelope to send it back to you, but then a ballot being filled out after the election day? Have you do you have a process to avoid that from happening?
Ms. Gelms, if you want to try that, otherwise.
Madam Chair, I think I would leave that up to the Secretary of State to answer.
Right. Yeah, I can understand that.
Very good.
So Senator Westrom, we will take that, give you that first opportunity for that question.
And Madam Chair, will we be hearing from the Secretary of State today, or what is your plan for?
Secretary of State 30 minutes before the meeting notified us that the Secretary of State would not be here. And so we decided to go ahead with the county portion, but it's my understanding that the Secretary of State is not going to be on today. We are going to reschedule as soon as we can so that we can have the Secretary of State.
Okay, Madam Chair, that'd be great. And I hope we can do it very soon. And these are questions that would be good to get answered sooner than later.
Right. Thank you very much, Senator Westrom. Your point is well made. That is certainly was our intention. And and our disappointment is duly noted. So with that, I'm going to go to Mr. Triplett. Thank you very much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Ms. Gelms, if you just stay available so that in case there's anything else that comes up. But Mr. Triplett, obviously you have heard, and I've noticed you watching and observing all of this discussion and appreciate that. But could you maybe tell us about your processes, maybe the manned, unmanned, how you handle that, ballot board, some of those are kind of the two areas where a lot of questions came. So I don't need you to go over, like Ms. Skelms did a very nice job of walking us through the usual process. But on ballot boards, party balance, some of those things that you probably tracked with, if you could just address those, Mr. Triplett.
Sure, Madam Chair and senators on the committee.
Can you lean into your microphone a little more? Sorry to bother you. We want to hear you.
Madam Chair, is this better?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I did keep a few notes. Most of our processes are very similar to what Hennepin County is doing because a lot of this, as you know, is listed in law, and we're obviously following the same guidance provided from the Secretary of State. For points of clarification, where we differ in Ramsey County from what Hennepin County is, we have one ballot board in Ramsey County, so all mail ballots come to a central ballot board. Our cities have delegated that authority to the county. So all mail balloting originates from Ramsey County and comes back to the Ramsey County ballot.
Mr. Triplett, can I clarify, really important right now, when you
Yes.
say mail balloting, you are referring to absentee balloting, correct?
Correct,
Let's be sure we use that. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair. I'm referring to absentee balloting. You're right, the jargon in this is a little heavy at times. So yes, absentee ballots in Ramsey County all get mailed out and get mailed back to the county. So that's unique in Ramsey County. We have one ballot board for the entire county for our cities as well. The other difference is that our ballot board is staffed with 93 election judges and 8 deputy county auditors. Our ballot board has balance between the political parties. We do have no members from the 2 new major political parties. So our ballot board is made up of Democrats and Republicans, and then a handful of judges who have provided us a statement that they do not affiliate with a political party. For the accepting and rejecting process, the 93 election judges on our ballot board are always used and are always paired with judges of different political parties to carry out that act. So that is one point of clarification I didn't want to make. Our ballot board, as of today, has 93 election judges and 8 deputy county auditors. The deputy county auditors are really there to just kind of administer the 93 election judges. They need to be scheduled, they need to be paid, they need to be trained. And so that's really the role of our deputy auditors on our 2020 ballot board that we have implemented for the 3 elections that we're conducting in Ramsey County this year. And I want to clarify as well, in Ramsey County, we are also having staffed ballot return locations. So we do not use the term in Ramsey County drop off, ballot drop off, drop boxes. We specifically call these ballot return locations, where you need to come inside our building, hand your ballot to our election judges. So our return locations are staffed again by 2 election judges. And then if you are returning ballots for other individuals like Hennepin County, we ask you if this is your own ballot. If you say no, we do log your name and we have you sign that. State law also requires that you show us an ID to prove who you are. And we log all that, and then we do track that in a database so we can ensure that people are only turning 3 ballots for the election. And so those, based on what Hennepin County presented, I thought for this committee were the pertinent points of differences between Ramsey and Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Triplett. Sometimes your voice does fade off. So, but really appreciate it. It did come through, but sometimes I had to work a little harder to hear it all. I really appreciate that. It's really good to hear what you've done in regards to having that group of election judges actually drawn from that. One of the questions I have for you is, what's your source of those 93 election judges?
Madam Chair, state law indicates that on May 15th, the Secretary of State's office will provide us lists that were provided to them from the major political parties. This year, I believe the total list had about 400 election judges. So when we receive the list from the state, we send all the judges on these lists an interest email saying, hey, we got your name from the party lists. Are you interested in being an election judge? And then if you respond, yep, we're interested, we send you, the paperwork and whatnot. And then we send out a follow-up email saying, hey, we need staff, election judges to staff our ballot board. Are you interested in working on our ballot board? I believe most of the judges, I could give you the exact details after this, but I would say about half our judges of the 93 judges on the ballot board came from the 2020 party lists. And once we've exhausted that, then we reach out to all the other election judges in Ramsey County. We currently have about 2,500 election judges in our database. Once we've exhausted the party list, we reach out to all of those judges. I will tell you, most of those judges have come through the party lists over the last, decade or so as well. And then we continually send out emails weekly as we need more people. Some people don't see the original email. Obviously, we all receive lots of emails. And then with that, if we don't get enough election judges, we will use deputy auditors. But again, for the 2020 ballot board, we have 93 election judges and 8 deputy auditors. But election judges are the only folks who are doing the accepting and rejecting in Ramsey County. And that's 2 judges of different political parties for clarification.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Triplett. That is very encouraging to hear, very good to know. And I think for us to know that those election judges in that 2,500 database are also retained by political party. So you have quite a list, and many times election judges are long time. They like to work, they come back, and they like to do it. And that also expedites things because they are more quickly trained than somebody totally new. So that's really good to hear. On regards to these return locations, they're always inside a building, correct? So they're always with somebody there. And if they return a ballot and they say it's their own ballot, do they show their ID so that you can see that it is their own ballot?
Madam Chair, first question, are all the ballot return locations inside? Yes, they are all inside. Now, with that said, at various locations, so we have 10 return locations across the county. They're either in county-owned buildings or city-owned buildings, predominantly libraries. We do provide signs at certain locations where we can have enough parking that says, hey, if you're unable to enter the polling place, give this number a call, and then 2 judges will come out to your car and retain that ballot. They bring a secure bag with them that's sealed up. They have you deposit your ballot in that, and then they go inside. So for clarification, we do give an accommodation that we will send 2 judges outside, but our box is not outside, and we send the 2 judges to you. Your second question, Madam Chair, was for voters returning their own ballot, do they show an ID? No, state law does not require them to do that. So we do not require them to do that, but state law does require you to show your ID if you're returning someone else's ballot. So our first question to every voter returning a ballot is this your own ballot? And if the question answer is no, we make them sign the log and show us their ID before we'll accept that ballot.
Okay, members, any other questions for Mr. Triplett here? All right, I think the questions that we sometimes have here, we have 2 major counties which have a large percentage of the voting population, especially mostly so actually in Hennepin County is the largest county in the entire state of Minnesota. So Ms. Gelms, you have a very big job on your hands. We understand that and appreciate that. And you also, Ms. Triplett. Members, do we have any other questions at this time that we would like to address? And to let you know, we will reschedule for the Secretary of State office as well. All right, it appears as though at this time we don't have any other questions, and then we'd have some additional information requested. And anybody that can give us that information, whether it's Mr. Maeda or Ms. Gelms or Mr. Triplett, if there's anything at all. We may have some follow-up questions for you. So I know that Mr. Carlson has your email address as well. So with that, for today, we have concluded what we can do today. And members, we are adjourned. Mr. Carlson, Senator Carlson, sorry.
Thank you, Madam
Paul
Chair.
Carlson was up in that left-hand corner, Senator Carlson. So I called you Mr. Carlson, and I quick saw your senator.
We always get confused with each other. I would like to know, you mentioned a couple of times that you just heard from the secretary that he couldn't make it. I knew days ago that he was not going to be able to make it. And he said that he had a long-standing a conflict that he said that he had notified, and I'm wondering if Mr. Carlson did get a response from the secretary, because what the secretary needed to do was to make sure that Mr. Maeda and Ms. Black were online here. So if there's something that is confusing there, I think we should probably allow the secretary to clear that up.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to have that. And certainly sometimes miscommunication happens but I don't think that Mr. Carlson would have been planning for the secretary to be here if he didn't think that was the case, or we would have rescheduled it for another time when he was available. So just a miscommunication could have happened there as well. So I appreciate your clarification though, Senator Carlson. Appreciate that very much. Okay, members, with that, stay tuned and we are adjourned for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.